This is The Art Ambassador with your host, Gwenda Joyce. A former gallery owner, Gwenda takes artists through a step-by-step process that moves them past frustration and into comfort, abundance, and creative flow. So now, please welcome the host of The Art Ambassador, Gwenda Joyce.
Hello, and welcome to the Art Ambassador radio show on BBM Global Network. I am your host, Gwenda Joyce. I'm also known as the Art Ambassador. I like to bring art into the conversation, and in my work and my career, I focus on bringing artists and their art in contact with more people. Today, we have a very wonderful show with three exciting guests, and I'm so glad you're here to join us. Our question today, and the topic we'll be talking about is, can you revive your career as a mid-career or a late-career artist? We'll talk about the challenges that artists face later in their careers and how to overcome that. It's a struggle to find an audience at any level when you're an artist. And with the changes in the art world, the audience is constantly changing. One of our main focuses is to find out who's interested and who we can connect with. Oftentimes it's the general public. In the professional art world, it's galleries, art consultants, and museums, and all the personnel that come with that. It can be a struggle to integrate with the larger art world, and artists often feel when they're later in their careers, because of all the changes, that the art world has passed them by. At any point in your lives, it can be a struggle to make a living and support yourself when there's no clear way to do so. And so putting your creativity into that part of your art career is often the saving grace of being an artist. But it can be challenging, as we know. And when artists get later in their careers, they're thinking about things differently. So my guests today are here to talk about this topic, their diverse experience in dealing with art, the art world, the audience, and their careers. My guests today are two artists, Howard Hersh and Kevan Jenson, whose careers have been revived and changed later in their life. And Reuben Gibson is another guest. He's the owner of a new concept gallery that is adapted to today's lifestyle. So I'd first like to bring on artist Howard Hersh. Howard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gwenda.
Howard is a third-generation artist who's based in San Francisco, and he's worked as a professional artist for his entire career. He has sold and exhibited his work widely throughout the country and in galleries and with art consultants all around the world. He's had, to his credit, over 60 solo shows and 200 group exhibits. So, Howard, it's great to have you. A long and diverse experience, and tell me, if you would, by starting to describe what the art is that you're working on now, what you're focusing on, what it looks like now.
For the last, I'd say 5-6 years, I've been working on combining elements of sculpture and painting together, moving past pictures of things to include them also being objects. So that has been my focus.
So you've changed your focus a bit in the last 4 or 5 years. Although I think that in looking at your work, you have had a thread of interest in the same ideas. You have a lifelong passion for nature and beauty, and this is clearly reflected in your art. In fact, there is a quote that you say, "I strive to assemble and depict relationships between art, nature, architecture, and spirituality," and that you hope your life and your art are all part of this beautiful yet mysterious process. It's a wonderful quote, and yet your work has evolved and your career has evolved. Give us a little background, if you would, about how your career evolved in the first early to middle years of your career.
Well, I would say from the very beginning, drawing was a big part of my art life, as it was when I was a kid. I drew obsessively, and so I think drawing kind of led me into artwork. And then from that point, it was a matter of experimenting with different mediums and styles. My earliest work was figurative, and then it gradually dropped the figure and got much more abstract. And as the years went on, I started introducing geometry and combining it with organic. And now I would say it's strictly geometric and more sculptural.
No, we met, Howard and I met and started an association back in the 90s when I had a gallery in Chicago, and I showed Howard's work there. And at that time, Howard, you were very actively showing with a number of galleries. You were showing your works made out of both acrylic and encaustic on panels. Mm-hmm. And then you also had a very active part of your career in terms of working with art on paper. So how did what did your career look like in terms of getting exhibitions? You've had a total of 61 person exhibitions. So in those early in those years, 20 or so years ago, what did it look like as a career?
Well, I think a lot of that actually was the right time, the right place. I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1984, when most places, especially Santa Fe, were doing quite well. Texas was having a big oil boom, and so basically I fell into a very healthy art scene and art market that frankly wasn't that hard to get into. Santa Fe especially was good because gallerists and consultants from around the country would come to Santa Fe as a vacation, as like a working vacation, because it's a great place to visit, and they knew they could meet a lot of artists there. So that was really a great way to get started. And in fact, like my relationship with you now, I'm still working with a lot of the same people I met in the 80s and 90s in Santa Fe. So there was quite a bit of luck involved.
When you say you worked with them, does that mean that you had a lot of gallery exhibitions that you would work toward, or you were doing projects? Describe what that looked like, if you would.
Well, I'm just saying that many of the dealers that I met back in the 80s and 90s, I'm still either in contact with, or working directly with, or working now and then as in art consultants. I get calls just out of the blue from art consultants that maybe I haven't worked with for years, but they have a new project and they thought of me. And so that's what I mean about continuing the relationships.
Well, it emphasizes the fact. It emphasizes the fact that relationships are important, and that oftentimes I think artists maybe all of us dream of being picked out of the crowd and turned into an overnight star. But the reality is that it's a matter of meeting the right people and developing relationships. And as Howard says, these can last over decades. And it's something to think about.
And of course, keeping in touch with them in a timely way is important. So
it is important. I think if you don't stay in touch with your audience or your potential clients or people to work with, then they think that you've gone away or maybe switched careers or they don't know what you're doing. And with an artist, you're always coming up with new ideas and new imagery. So Howard, we're going to take a short break right now, but we will be back to talk more about what you've been doing recently with your career. This is The Art Ambassador, and I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, on BBM Global Network. I'm also the author of the book, 9 Steps to Artistic Freedom, which is available at artambassador.net on the website. Stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Gwenda Joyce, the host of the Art Ambassador radio show, and I'm here today with artists talking about reviving their art careers later in life. And my first guest, Howard Hersh, has had a very illustrious career over the years. And Howard, if you would tell us a bit about a period, maybe about 10 years ago, that there was a significant change in the art world, and it affected your art career considerably. What can you tell us about that time and that period?
Glad it was 10 years ago, because that was, and by the way, it wasn't just the art world. So, I mean, the whole world went through quite an economic shock. So it took, I think, 3 or 4 years from the crash to actually hit bottom, which turned out to be almost 90% of my income. So it was pretty devastating. And I love making art. It's what I do. I come to the studio, and that is my life. So in that way, nothing really changed as far as my flow of work. I just kept at it. Right around that same time, again, as luck would have it, I got a new studio at Hunters Point Shipyards, which for a very below market rates. So that actually helped me through the big downturn.
And at the same time, you started making some changes in your imagery shortly after that, when you started to feel like you were looking at things differently. Is that right? Yeah, that's when you started working on your constructions. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was also around the time I dropped in caustic. So I went through quite a few changes. One thing about a bad economy, if this is kind of strange to say, but it's actually liberating for an artist, in that you don't have much to lose by trying different things. In other words, what you thought was your best work isn't selling anymore. So there's no real reason to hold on to that.
Well, I think that's
I found it actually. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting comment that you make, Howard, because I felt almost the same thing with my gallery in the 90s. Shortly after I opened, I was just getting established about 2 years later, and things were working really well in terms of getting recognition and sales for the artists I was working with. And the first recession that I experienced as a gallery owner hit, and there was a terrible downturn and a lot of anxiety. Yeah. And it forced me to take a look at what was really important to me in terms of having a gallery, and what I felt were the strongest elements that I wanted to pursue in representation and showing artists. And that's when I really started to make a commitment to mid-career artists as opposed to focusing so much on emerging artists. And my reasoning was twofold. One is that the artists were very committed and had shown their commitment over their lifetimes by continuing to make art. And there was a sense of seriousness in the art that they made, and that connected with the audience, so that there was a feeling that, there was a feeling on the part of the people who were continuing to come by that they knew that these artists were going to be around for a long time, whether we were in a recession or not. And that helped me commit to mid-career artists, and I kind of shifted my approach after that. So it's a different. We're kind of talking about the same thing, aren't we? It's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it didn't help pay the bills any better, but creatively, I think it was very liberating and led to better work, I think. More serious, more personal, So,
your new work that you've spent a number of years now developing, series called Skin Deep and a new one called Migrations. The way I describe it is that you're taking the structure of a painting and you're just blowing it wide open. You're turning it inside out and you're opening it up to reveal the structure of the painting. And that is really dramatic, and it is challenging. I think it's challenging for the viewers.
I've always been interested in people being able to see into my paintings, the layers and the process. So I've kind of expanded that idea by exposing the physicality and the structure of the object itself and how it becomes the image. So.
Yes, and it's a complex and it's a complex and challenging way to look at art, and it also expresses that idea that you have of no separation between the inside and the outside, both in a physical way and a metaphorical way. So, just briefly, if you would tell us what's happened with your career, say in the last, even less than a year, in order to get established with this new body of work that you've now been working on for about 4 or 5 years.
Well, I have a museum show up right now. It's a small museum on the peninsula in the Bay Area, and it's up for almost 3 months. I produced a catalog, which I hope to kind of extend the reach of the show with. So that's kind of my next kind of chunk of strategy to work on. I hope that this museum show can leapfrog things. So.
Well, that's a big commitment, and congratulations on that show. And I will add that Thanks. Howard and I started working together to reach out to new galleries to represent his work, and that the museum show and the catalog have helped. And we have found Howard has a new gallery, Slate Gray Gallery in Colorado, and a new one in the works in Southern California. So there are two new relationships with galleries that he's working on. And so it is a very exciting and time for him in his career, and he's really moving forward. Howard, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back and talking more about working with mid-career and later career artists and developing those careers. This is Gwenda Joyce. I'm the host of the Art Ambassador radio show on BBM Global Network. We will be right back after a short. Hello and welcome back to the Art Ambassador radio show. I'm Gwenda Joyce, your host. And today we're talking about artists who are mid-career and later career artists who may have been challenged in getting established or found dips in their careers as things evolved, and yet are able to revive their careers later in life. Today, I'd like to introduce my next guest, Reuben Gibson. Reuben is the owner of Gibson Art Projects in Berkeley, California, and I think he's got an exciting thing going on. I call what he's doing a new concept gallery, but he's really integrating a lot of tried and true concepts with his gallery. So, Reuben Gibson, welcome to the Art Ambassador radio show.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Reuben, I'd like you, if you would, to tell everyone how you got started as an art dealer and a gallery owner. You come from a different world, but now you find yourself immersed in the world of art, in contemporary art. Tell us how that happened.
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, so the short story is that it's in the blood. I'm the son of a mid-career artist, and just like you, Howard, my father goes into the studio every day, treats it like he's a true working artist in the studio every day, more than 9 to 5. And, even if the creative juices aren't flowing, it's about showing up. And as you mentioned, Gwenda, just that seriousness, that commitment, that perseverance. And so, growing up as the son of a painter and Bay Area figurative artist, being in the studio with him, just kind of growing up around that, I think that was a huge influence for me. And of course, you want to help your parents, and you kind of you often gravitate towards what you have experience and love for. So that's kind of where it started for me, and as well as in other aspects of my family too. My uncle, Ben Heller, is a pretty well-known collector mostly and dealer in New York, and discovered some pretty important and influential folks in the ABEX movement in the 50s in New York. So there's this, coming from both sides, from the artist side, but also from the art business side, influences and, the discovery of artists, and thinking that was something that was really, valuable and substantial and interesting. And really finding people that have stories to tell. And, that's what's exciting for me. So yeah, as you mentioned, I come from a different world. So when I graduated college in 2009, Howard brought this up earlier, the world had changed. So I didn't quite know what to do. It was the financial crisis. There were no jobs. And I moved out to the Bay Area, and I had some experience working. I had an internship at Stanford Research Institute. So I thought maybe I could work in technology. And so I ended up getting a job and selling software for about 6 years in San Francisco. And it was, I met a lot of interesting people. I worked with a lot of smart people, and was fairly successful at it, and really, enjoyed myself. But it wasn't my true calling. I always wanted to do something in the art world, but I wasn't sure how to do that. So it came to a point where I felt comfortable enough to make a switch, and I had always talked with my father about, how cool would it be if we could have a space where we could show the artwork that we wanted, or show the artists that we wanted to show. And right around that time, I was looking for a place to live. I was hoping to buy property in the Bay Area, specifically Berkeley. And I was looking for a while, and I ended up coming across this amazing house. Somebody said, my broker at the time said, "Hey, there are these. I have to leave. Actually, we're looking at another property. I have to leave. I'm going to this committee meeting. There are these murals in this house." And I said, "Hold on a second. What are you talking about? Murals in a house? That sounds really interesting." And I said, well, I'm curious about this house. I got to see it. So anyway, long story short, I ended up coming in contact with this a space where I could live, and also what I thought was an ideal space to show artwork. And so I kind of combined the two in this house. And when we come back from the commercial break, I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the space, and also an artist that I work with who is on the program as well. How does that sound, Gwenda?
That sounds terrific, Reuben. And we are going to take a short break. And you have really allowed this to evolve. Bring your personal life and your business life and your home life together into a very interesting business for yourself, and one that I know is gathering the attention of the public to bring art and this experience to everyone. So we will hear more about Reuben Gibson's art business and salon after we take a short break. This is Gwenda Joyce. I'm the host of the Art Ambassador radio show. And if you stay with us, we will be right back and learn more about Gibson art projects. Hello and welcome back to the Art Ambassador radio show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, and we're on BBM Global Network today talking with Reuben Gibson of Gibson Art Projects. Reuben has a fascinating gallery in a home that was owned by the renowned movie critic, Pauline Kael of the New York Times. And when she was in her element back in the 60s, and 70s writing movie criticism, she also bought this home and kind of used it as a way of gathering artistic people together. And this home is now finding new life in Reuben Gibson's hands. And Reuben, you've turned it into a salon and an art gallery. Tell us how this works for you and what you're focusing on exhibiting and what you feel like the legacy of the home is.
Yeah, so, and I was talking a little bit before about how sort of what I saw was a unique opportunity, inspired me to really use the house as a platform and continue its history. So, as you mentioned, Pauline Kael owned the house in the 50s and hosted all sorts of salons with creative artists and poets and writers, and even commissioned the renowned visual artist Jess to do these murals throughout the home. The reason I knew about this was because Jess my father went to the same art school Jess did at San Francisco Art Institute, and Pauline, my mother, had her books in our house growing up, so I had some sort of familiarity with it. And I thought, wow, this would be amazing. It would be a great place to make people aware of the rich artistic, cultural history of the Bay Area, but also to bring in, to continue the narrative and bring in artists and show contemporary artwork that is important, that maybe has been looked over. And so, and this is what we're working on is using the past as a platform to kind of cultivate a new cultural and artistic discussion. And so, we have archival shows and shows that relate to the history of the house and the circle of artists that surround it. But we also, insert new and contemporary artists, and to date, and I plan on continuing to do this, mid-career artists, which which brings us to my work with Kevan Jenson, who's going to be talking after me. I met Kevan through Peter Sells. Peter Sells was the chief curator of painting and sculpture at the MoMA in New York in the 60s. He did this amazing show called New Images of Man. He founded the Berkeley Art Museum, and he's been an advisor for me. And he said, "Hey, you should meet Kevan. Kevan has some really interesting, important work. It's completely different than anything you've ever seen." And so I met Kevan, and we really hit it off and had similar values and things in common. But Kevan, what I was really inspired by in terms of Kevan's work and history and just mid-career artists in general is this, dedication to the craft. And in Kevan's case, what I saw was one artwork that I thought was really interesting and said something. And I also saw this narrative, this vast experience in many different lives, having worked in the film industry, having been a taxi driver in New York, but all the while being a working artist, and working. Kevan had these really interesting. I mean, first of all, getting Peter Sells' attention, who has been kind of a Berkeley legend in the art world here, and working with Hito Sterile, who's an amazing artist who has had lots of notoriety recently. I saw this. There was a really interesting connection, and as well as just like what I get really stimulated by is tying in a narrative and also aligning with a little bit of the history of the house and the lineage of surrealism and as well as using one's imagination to deal with our challenges that we face in our life, in our artwork, and so that's what I'm working on, and that's how I came to represent Kevan.
And that's, Reuben, how I think why gallery owners like to have a gallery so much. If I might draw on my own personal experience, that owning a gallery and presenting artwork and working with artists is very much a back and forth relationship between being inspired by the materials that you have at hand and then adding to it with what you see in the world around you. And in this case, you're drawing on the history of the house, your location, and you're bringing in artists who you meet from your community, and you're creating a larger narrative from all these pieces. I think it's a very exciting project, and I know you are open to the public and are open to by appointment. So people who are interested, check out Reuben Gibson and his Gibson Art Projects through their website and get connected. But Reuben, tell us also, I know you do some special things like putting on films or special events. What is something you have coming up that maybe people could go to and participate in?
Yeah, so there's something immediately that folks, it's kind of completely out there, but it's really interesting. I'm excited about it. Currently, we have a Lawrence Jordan exhibition on display. Now, Lawrence was connected to Robert Duncan, Jess, as well as Pauline Kael. He was in the house in the 50s and 60s. And so this is one of this, the narratives that ties in and how we continue to show artists from that circle. And Lawrence is an experimental filmmaker. He's a visual artist. He creates these amazing boxes that have their own cosmos. This Sunday, we have a 12-hour screening of his film Circus Savage, which is kind of an autobiographical film that spans time and space. And it's going to be great. We're going to have it running from 10 in the morning on for 12 hours. People can stop by whenever they want, see as much of the film as they want. I'm very excited about that.
Well, this is a drop-in event on Sunday. If you are in or around Berkeley, to our audience, you're invited to come to Gibson Art Projects and experience Lawrence Jordan's program or his film. And we are going to take a short break now. I am going to be bringing on our next guest, Kevan Jenson. So stay with us. This is Gwenda Joyce. I'm the host of the Art Ambassador radio show. Welcome back. This is Gwenda Joyce, the host of the Art Ambassador radio show on BBM Global Network. We've been talking today about artists and their careers later in life and how they can be revived and looked at in a different way, and how there are art dealers who are working in conjunction with these artists to see that the work comes about to the public and doesn't get lost in the art world, which is constantly moving and changing. My next guest today is artist Kevan Jenson, who is a San Francisco Bay Area artist with a very diverse and interesting background. But as Reuben Gibson, his dealer, was just saying, that Kevan is the kind of artist who's done a number of things throughout his life, but he's always had that thread of working on his art and developing it. So Kevan Jenson, welcome to the Art Ambassador radio show.
Thanks, Gwenda. It's great to be here.
So Kevan, if you could give us an overview of the kinds of things that have happened in your art career. I know that you have had some highlights, and then you've had some periods of time where your work really hasn't been visible. What are a couple of the highlights that have occurred over the years?
Well, I would say, first of all, that as I get older, I appreciate the weirdness of the art career as a lifestyle or a career path. I think it's very non-traditional, and in a way, when I was younger, I thought that there was kind of like, sort of a path that you would take, and it would all work out in some way. And as I get older, I find that it's actually the odd things that happen that end up the most powerful, at least for me. So, when I was a young student here at Cal, I had a mentorship with Harold Paris, who was a seminal Bay Area artist, and I worked with him for a very short period of time. And then he actually passed away very suddenly, and it left me in the lurch. And then I ended up moving to New York, and I had a whole life I had an art studio and a recording studio with a bunch of punk musicians and all kind of other strange people. That was quite an interesting time. And then I moved to Los Angeles, worked in the film industry for many years, had quite a successful career there. And at the very end of my experience in Los Angeles, right around the time of the housing crash, I started working on some film projects, documentaries and other things like that. And I was working with a now very well-known video artist, Tito Steyerl, out of Berlin, who I met as a film producer, as a film worker. And we together produced a film. Basically, the film was about, in a way, the collapse of my life.
And oh no!
Yeah, I mean, it was.
And you didn't know that you had written it.
Well, I didn't know that. We didn't really understand when we started working together that I was going to end up the subject of this. But we were doing a film about economics and the art world and how things kind of circulate. And as a consequence of that, my work started gaining notoriety. It actually got collected pretty well, and ended up. I had a piece go in the Centre Pompidou a few years later in correlation with this project. And then my wife and I decided to move from LA. We just figured we might as well make a change, and we felt really strong connection to the Bay Area. And we came up here, and my wife went on to open up a very successful career as an arts entrepreneur and an administrator. And I ended up working, here and getting pieces collected that I just didn't expect it to happen. And so what I feel is that, the artist's career path, you really have to look for these kind of odd connections, things that maybe don't look right, but they end up opening doors that are unseen. And that's something that I've experienced with Reuben. Reuben and I are of different generations and different life experiences for sure. And yet, he has sort of a sympathy and an understanding of what I'm doing, which is it jives very well with my own predilections. So that also is kind of weird. So, and this all kind of to sort of sum it up, it all goes back to something Harold Parrish told me many, many years ago. He said, if the miraculous doesn't happen from time to time, as an artist, you're living the wrong life.
I love that quote. I absolutely love that quote, and I think your comments about the serendipity of life really is something that we all can take to heart and just recognize that it's a little bit of creativity, it's a little bit of timing, it's a little bit of being open to what comes in front of you, and there you have it. You have a life as an artist. Kevan, I saw your work in Miami this last December at the Pulse Art Fair that Gibson Art Projects was presenting your work in a one-person show. Tell us about your work now, your paintings, and just describe them a little bit and what their meaning is to you. They're fascinating.
Well, I mean, I've been working for many years using smoke as a medium, almost like sumi drawing, but with a torch. So the torch emits carbon, like charcoal. It's actually lamp black is the technical pigment, and it emits it with a flame, and that's actually how you make lamp black. But I cut the whole process short and just take the flame and lick it around the canvas and apply the lamp black into the paint. And that becomes the sort of major content of my work. So, and my work has always been somewhat apocalyptic and I would say pathological, in that I've always felt that we were living in a precarious world with ecological and other sort of disasters constantly on our consciousness. So that's been kind of the deep subject matter that I've tried to work with.
Well, we are keeping it alive, and your work alive. We're keeping art alive. We're keeping all of this alive through our creativity and our approach. Maybe that awareness of an apocalypse will help us to work harder and focus more on what we can create now to make the world a better place. I believe art.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I believe art is so important to have in our lives, and I am so glad that you're continuing to make work. I want to thank you for joining us today. We are going to take a short break, and we will be right back. This is Gwenda Joyce, the host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show. Stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm Gwenda Joyce, your host. And my goal is to bring art into the conversation. We've been talking today about the challenges that mid and late career artists face and how they have overcome them. We have had interesting stories of times where not too much is going on or even downturn, and then rejuvenation, new energy, and new excitement in terms of exposure for your art career. As I tell my children, life is long, and in order to keep life interesting, we go through periods of reinvention and, of course, assessment and looking at ourselves. If you're an artist, you may find times where you're feeling down and despondent and you're struggling, and especially if at a certain period in your life you feel like the art world has passed you by or nobody cares about your art. I hope you were inspired by the stories today of people actively engaged in connecting art with people and building an audience that relates to your work, developing relationships over time, and creating a narrative to have that exist in. There are lots of different options and different ways of doing it for each artist. But if you have dreams of showing your art to people, to more people, and getting it out there, I think you can understand from our conversations today that maybe it's complicated, but it is possible. Oftentimes, you need a new infusion of energy and maybe a different perspective, advice, or help to make connections that will work for you. I've helped artists revive their careers, and I was named recently, I was called a supercharger for an artist's art career. I like that description. I'm passionate about bringing art to the world. I help a lot of artists break that barrier between themselves and the larger art world, and it brings me great joy to help artists succeed and get their work out there in a bigger way. I describe the art world as my beat, and if you're challenged by it, you may be in need of removing your fear of success or creating an effective marketing plan, developing audiences, relationships, and connections with the right people. As your agent, I help create a strategy, identify galleries, and make submissions that are a good match for you to develop those relationships that work both ways so that your connection is really solid in terms of your goals and getting your work out into the hands of the right people. If you'd like to enlist my help, I encourage you to reach out to me. You can reach me through artambassador.net, the website. It starts by applying to have a free first conversation with me over the phone. We'll talk for about an hour about your challenges and pinpoint what it is you want and where you'd like to go with your career or with a particular body of work or project that you're working on. I'll let you know what I think and what you can expect in the years to come. I promise in this first conversation that we have, there's no obligation to work together, and you'll get a ton of value out of it. I invite you to have that first conversation with me. As I said, you can apply right now on my website, artambassador.net. You can request to get your art out there, free conversation as a gift from me. You can also go to artambassador.net/apply to us, fill out that form, and I'll let you know within 24 hours when we can set up our appointment. I look forward to connecting with you, and I really appreciate that you're being here today with us. It was great to have you and my guests, Howard Hersh, Reuben Gibson, and Kevan Jenson. This is your host, Gwenda Joyce, the art ambassador and author of 9 Steps to Artistic Freedom. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
This has been The Art Ambassador with your host, Gwenda Joyce. If you're stuck in a creative world with little to no meaningful exposure and are looking to blend creative with the entrepreneurial spirit, listen each week for enlightening options and answers on Gwenda Joyce's The Art Ambassador.